I want to send a special thanks to Colleen Gregorio, who's done so much, to Dave Fine and Becky Fine Fire Sheets for making us look and sound so good, even hip at times. To Rob Barker for the awesome posters, Gracelyn Weaver for everything, including emotional support in times of my despairing over this. To Rebecca Chase for putting together and coaching our awesome Student Readers Tuesday night and for being here. To Jeff Weinman, Peter Woolley, Brian Morrow, Rick Reese, thanks so much for your support since the very beginning of this. And finally, to my beloved colleagues who are really like family to me. Also to Gourmet Dining for their continued support, and to Bob and Patricia Perez, whose generosity saved Wamfest last year. It's a sincere thanks. We are honored to have with us today 4 truly great American artists. By now, if not completely before, you are all familiar with their astonishing achievement. In alphabetical order, Ben Allison on bass. Robert Pinsky on poem. Steve Slagle on sax and flute. Dave Stryker on guitar. Along with our fantastic artist in residence and host, Wesley Stace, on microphone a little later. But among astonishing achievements, I'd like to mention 2 by way of dedicating what part of this is mine to dedicate. First, to Robert, who is celebrating his 50th wedding anniversary, blasting off to England and Italy tomorrow. Second, I'd like to dedicate this to our dear friend Walter Cummins, who is recovering from surgery right now and not able to be here with us. He's done as much for creative writing at FDU as anyone, and equally as much for all our souls. Walt is the true jazz man. Ladies and gentlemen, Poem Jazz.
First poem is called Antique. I drowned in the fire of having you. I drowned in the fire of having you. I burned in the river of not having you. I drowned in the fire, I burned in the river. We lived together for hours in a house of 1,000 rooms. We lived together for hours in a house of 1,000 rooms, and we were parted for 1,000 years. Ten minutes ago, we raised our children. They cover the earth, and they have forgotten that we existed. It was not the worldly illusion of Maya. It was not a ladder to perfection. No, it was this cold sunlight falling on this warm earth. When I turned, you went to hell. When your ship fled the battle, I followed you and lost the world. I lost the world without regret, but with stormy recriminations. Someday far down that corridor of horror, the future. Someday far down that corridor of horror, the future, someone who buys this picture of you for the frame at a stall in a dwindled city. That person will study your face and decide to harbor it a little while longer from the waters of anonymity and the acids of breath. I drowned in the fire of having you. I burned in the river of not having you. We lived together for hours in a house of 1,000 rooms, and we were parted for 1,000 years. And someday, far down that corridor of horror, the future, somebody will buy this picture of you for the frame at a stall in the dwindled city. And that person will study your face and decide to harbor it a little while longer from the waters of anonymity and the acids of breath, because I drowned in the fire of having you. And I burned in the river of not having you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here again in my native state and celebrating in a way the story of my life, which is wanting music and words, which are traditionally sister arts, to come together. And to do it here with Steve, Dave, Ben is like a dream for me. When I was a teenager and in my early 20s, I wanted to be one of these people. And in fact, I would be a celebrated jazz musician today if it weren't for a single obstacle of a deficiency of talent. And my instrument was the tenor saxophone, and this next poem, Ginza Samba, which is the title of the jazz tune, goes back to my love for the instrument. The saxophone was invented by a Belgian man named Adolphe Sax. And I learned today from Steve that there were attempts on his life. He invented it in Paris, but it's an American instrument, isn't it? Because it was made so by geniuses. In fact, it's an African-American, a black American instrument, because different generations made it their instrument. And for me, like the history of everything, the history of the saxophone is a combination of horrible, horrible things like slavery and great things like music, and they're very hard to sort out. That wasn't the poem, that was me doing the traditional poetry reading, talking. Ginza Samba. A monosyllabic European named Sax invents a horn. Walla whirlity wah. Wallity whirlity wah. A kind of a brazen clarinet. But with its column of air, shaped not in a cylinder like a clarinet, but in a cone. Boa. In a cone widening forever outward, and boa, spouting infinitely upward through an upturned, swollen, golden bell rimmed like a gloxinia. Rimmed like a gloxinia flowering in Sax's Belgian imagination. In Sax's Belgian imagination, and in the unfathomable matrix of mothers and fathers, a genius graven humming into the cells of the body, or saved, cupped in the resonating grail of memory, memory changed and exchanged as in the trading of brasses. Memory changed and exchanged as in the trading of brasses, ivory, calicos, and slaves. Slave laborers and slave girls. Two cousins in a royal family of Niger known as the birds, or hawks. Two cousins in a royal family of Niger known as the birds or hawks. In Christendom, one cousin's child becomes a, quote, favorite Negro, end quote, ennobled by decree of the Tsar. And ennobled by decree of the Tsar, he founds a great family. of generals, dandies, and courtiers, including the poet Alexander Pushkin. Pushkin killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor, while the other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore, where she is raped and dies in childbirth. Pushkin is killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor, while the other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore, where she is raped and dies in childbirth. But the infant will marry a Seminole, and in the next chorus of time, their child fathers a great hawk or bird with many followers, among them this great-grandchild of the Jewish manager of a Pushkin estate, blowing his breath out into the wiggly tune, uncurling its triplets and sixteenths. The wiggly tune uncurling its triplets and sixteenths, the Ginza samba of breath and brass, the reed vibrating as a valve, the ether, the unimaginable wires and circuits of an ingenious box here in my room in this house built 100 years ago while I was elsewhere. It's like falling in love. It is like falling in love, the atavistic imperative of some one voice or face. The skill, the copper filament, the golden bellful of notes twirling through their invisible element from Rio to Tokyo and back again, gathering speed in the variations as they tunnel the twin-haunted labyrinths of stirrup and anvil, the twin-haunted labyrinths of stirrup and anvil, echoing the golden bellful of notes here in the hearkening instrument, of my skull. Next poem is called Samurai Song, and I'll start doing it with Steve Slagle, the man, I didn't know it, but the man I wanted to grow up to be when I was little. Samurai Song. When I had no roof, I made audacity my roof. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. When I had no father, I made care my father. When I had no mother, I embraced order. When I had no friend, I made quiet my friend. When I had no enemy, I opposed my body. When I had no temple, I made my voice my temple. I have no priest. My tongue is my choir. When I have no means, fortune is my means. When I have nothing, death will be my fortune. Need is my tactic. Detachment is my strategy. When I had no lover, I courted my sleep. Let's try it with the whole band now. When I had no roof, I made audacity my roof. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no thought, I waited. When I had no father, I made care my father. When I had no mother, I embraced order. When I had no friend, I made quiet my friend. When I had no enemy, I opposed my body. When I had no temple, I made my voice my temple. I have no priest. My tongue is my choir. When I have no means, fortune is my means. When I have nothing, death will be my fortune. When I had no supper, my eyes dined. When I had no eyes, I listened. When I had no ears, I thought. When I had no ears, I thought. And when I had no thought, I waited. The hearts, the legendary muscle that wants and grieves, the organ of attachment, the pump of thrills and pleasures, clinging in stubborn colonies like pulpy shore life battened on a jelly, slashed by the little deaths of sleep and pleasure. They swell in the nurturing spasms of the waves, sucking to cling. And even in death itself, frozen, they shrink to grip the granite harder. Buddha says, rid yourself of attachments and aversions. But in her father's orchard already, Juliet says to Romeo, you'd like to be my bird, but sweet, I would kill thee with too much cherishing, showing she knows already. As Art Pepper, that first time he takes heroin, knows already that he will go to prison and knows that he will suffer. And he says he knows he needs to have it or die. And the one who makes the general lose the world for love lets him say, would I had never seen her. But oh, says Enobarbus, then you would have missed a wonderful piece of work which left unseen would bring less glory to your travels. And among us creatures in the rock-torn surf, a wave of agitation, a gasp. A scholar quips, Shakespeare was almost certainly homosexual, heterosexual, or bisexual. The sonnets provide no evidence on the matter. Sonnets provide no evidence on the matter. He writes for Romeo an extravagant speech on tears in the Italian manner. His teardrops cover his chamber window, says the boy. He calls them crystals, inanely, and he sings them to Juliet with his heart, the almost certainly invented heart, which Buddha denounces in its endless changes, the heart forever jumping and moving like an ape. Over the poor ape's head, the crystal fountain of illusion crashes, the cold salt spume of pain and meaningless distinction, as Buddha says. But here in the crystal shower, mouths are open to sing. It is Lee Andrews and the Hearts in 1956 singing, I sit in my room looking out at the rain. My teardrops are like crystals, they cover my window pane. The turns of these illusions we make become their glory. To Buddha, every distinct thing is illusion and becoming is destruction, but still we sing in the shower. I do. but still we sing in the shower. I do. In the beginning, God drenched the emptiness with images, the potter cross-legged at his wheel in Benares market. The potter making mud cups, another cup each second, tapering up from the wheel between his fingers, each cup one more to sell to the tea seller at a penny for a dozen cups, and tea a penny a cup. The customers smash the empties, and waves of traffic grind the shards of cup to mud for new cups, and I keep a cup here next to me held a while from out of the cloud of dust that rises from the shattered pieces, the risen dust alive with fire, then settled and soaked and whirling again as on a wheel that turns and looks on the world as on another cloud, on everything the heart could grasp and throw away as a passing cloud, with even enlightenment itself another image, another cloud to break and churn a salt foam over the heart like an anemone that sucks at clouds and makes itself with clouds and sings with clouds and blur and melt and covers its window pane with clouds that blur and melt until one cloud clings and holds. As once in the temple, in the time before the temple was destroyed, a young priest saw the seraphim of the Lord. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their legs. With 2 they covered their faces and feet. With 2 they darted and hovered like dragonflies near the ceiling of the temple, like griffins. These are the images, the visions, too barbarous for heaven and too preposterous for belief on earth, that God sends to taunt his prophet with the truth no one can see that leads to who knows where. A seraph took a live coal from the altar. He seared the prophet's lips, and so he spoke. And as the record ends, a coda in retard. The hearts, in a shifting, velvety ah, and ah, prolonged again and again, as Lee Andrews reaches ah, high. For I have to gain faith, hope, and charity. God only knows the girl who loved me. Oh, if we only could start over again. And then the hearts chant the chords again a final time. Ah, and the record turns through all the music and on into silence again. These kids are pretty good, aren't they? Dave Stryker, Steve Slagle, Ben Allison. I'm going to give them a little test now. I will read a poem to you, not by me, a great poem. I'll read it to you, as it were, a cappella, or it's the only time musicians will be silent. They know I like them to play while I talk to you. I will read the poem as if I were just reading it at a poetry reading, and then we'll do it the way we've been doing it, and we'll see what they come up with for it. The poem is by perhaps the greatest musician of words ever in the English language, Ben Jonson. I mean, Shakespeare had a greater imagination, but nobody knew ear candy better than Ben Jonson. He knew how to make it very sweet in the harmonies and rhythms, and everybody knows that poetry has rhythm. It has pitch, too, and duration, and harmony, and Jonson did all that very well. This is Ben Jonson's poem, His Excuse for Loving. His excuse for loving. Let it not your wonder move, less your laughter that I love. Though I now write 50 years, I have had and have my peers. Poets, though divine, are men. Some have loved as old again, and it isn't always face, clothes, or fortune gives the grace, or the feature, or the youth. But the language and the truth, with the ardor and the passion, gives the lover weight and fashion. If you then would hear this story, first prepare you to be sorry that you never knew till now either whom to love or how. But be glad along with me when you learn that this is she of whose beauty it was sung. She shall make the old man young, keep the middle age at stay, and let nothing high decay, till she be the reason why all the world for love may die. let it not your wonder move, lest your laughter that I love. Poets, though divine, are men. Some have loved as old again. And it isn't always face, clothes, or fortune gives the grace, but the language and the truth, with the ardor and the passion, gives the lover weight and fashion. If you then would hear this story, first prepare you to be sorry that you never knew till now either whom to love or how, but be glad along with me when you learn this is she of whose beauty it was sung, she shall make the old man young, keep the middle-aged stay, and let nothing high decay till she be the reason why all the world for love may die.
Improvisation on Yiddish.
This poem is called Improvisation on Yiddish. And the band we haven't actually done it yet, but the band has something beautifully incongruous to do behind the poem. I've got you in my pocket. Ich hab mir verpocht. Ich hab dir verpocht. I've got you in my pocket. It sees me, and I cannot spell it. Ich hab dir in Bud. Ich hab dir in Bud. Which means I see you as if you were naked in the bathtub. I know you completely. Ich hab dir in Bud. Hab dir in Bud. Kishkas. Guts. Tongue of the guts, tongue of the heart naked, the guts of the tongue. Chadyin bud, bubalotion, tongue of my grandmother that I can't spell in these characters that I know. I know Hubdik and Bud, which means I see you and through you. Tongue of irony, intimate. tongue of the deer and the dead, tongue of death, tongue of laughing in the guts, naked and completely. Bubalotion. Lost tongue of the lost. Get away from me. Get away from me, which means come closer. Geh weg von mir. Geh weg von mir. Ich hab dich in Bud. I see you completely naked. Tongue of the deer and the dead, tongue of death, tongue of laughing in the guts, guts of the tongue, Bubalotion, lost tongue of the lost. Geh weg von mir, get away from me, which means come closer. We'll do one more poem. We'll do one more poem for you, and then the amazing writer and musician Wesley Stace will appear, and we'll talk. The poem is called Rhyme. Rhyme. Air, an instrument of the tongue. The tongue, an instrument of the body. The body, an instrument of spirit. The spirit, a being of the air. Each bird, the instrument and medium of its song. Each song, a containment, like a hotel room, ready for us guests who inherit our compartment of time there. In the Joseph Cornell box, among ephemera as its element, the stuffed bird, the parrot, art, mortal in its cornered sphere. Each room, a stanza rung in a laddered filament, clambered by all us unsteady chambered voices that share it, each one reciting, I too was here. I too was here. In a room, a rhyme, a song. In the box, in books. Each element, an instrument. The body still straining to parrot the spirit, a being of air. Air, an instrument of the tongue, an instrument of the body, an instrument of the spirit, and the spirit, a being of the air. I too was here. we're going to rearrange the furniture.
I thought it went very well. That was cool. That was pretty good. Shockingly good. Different, right? It's the great thing is that it's different. Different moods, different people. Absolutely. The key is to have musicians who can play. That is such a big help.
It's so underrated. Yeah, people just for some reason.
Where's Wes? Oh.
Yeah, man. That was nice. That was pretty, that was.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Yeah.
Should we go back?
No, watch out for this.
Try this one.
Hello, hello. Was that one on? Is this one on? Great. You're very, very lucky people at Fairleigh Dickinson. I just pop by every now and then to see these glorious events. I feel very lucky to do so. That they're happening in your front room is amazing. One more round of applause, please, for Robert Pinsky and his band. We've had so many amazing events in this series over the years, and I remember the thing that this very much reminded me of was Talib Kweli and Quincy Troop on this very stage. And of course, the last time you were here, we were chatting with Bruce Springsteen, who was in the theatre, who was also playing along in a very different way, as I will be playing along with you at Symphony Space in December. A terrifying thought, having just seen that. But at least it's a John Cage piece, so I don't actually have to do anything. I can just be quiet for 20 minutes, and that'll be beautiful. Let me just ask, firstly, your history and connection to jazz. Why you fell in love with it, and because I know that's your main love in music is jazz. How did you fall in love with it?
The students here may have trouble picturing it, but when I was in high school and college, the most cool thing, even for people who didn't follow the music, was jazz. Once on tape, now on, and I play along with them, and they're great. They don't make any faces when I do stupid things, and they start over again whenever I want them to. And so that's my amateur connection with the music.
And were you, at the time, were you aware of, people like Jack Kerouac, there's those tapes of him playing along with jazz in the background and stuff?
The best one is Kenneth Rexroth.
Right, sure.
Kenneth Rexroth, who was a sort of slightly older, but a kind of a father figure for a certain kind of mentor for some of that generation, he knew a lot more about the music than Kerouac or Ginsberg did.
Right.
And he's working with musicians whom he knows around San Francisco. I am not interested in being an actor. I'm interested in being a horn player. So I try very hard to use my voice, not inexpressively, but I try to use it to do, when I write, I try to do what I wish I could do with the horn and couldn't do with the horn. In a way, writing is the wrong word for what I do. It isn't this, it's here.
And I noticed that when you're doing it, your enunciation is such. I mean, I've seen you read without music, and your enunciation always makes me believe that you believe in your voice as an instrument that's part of the, the musical scene.
I'm sure some people are annoyed by how much attention I pay to consonants and vowels in different quantities. I know I'm sometimes prone to exaggerate it. It's probably particularly ridiculous for some people in combination with my New Jersey accent. But for me, the sounds of words is absolutely everything. It's the center of everything. It's the center of what I can do in art, is the sounds of words.
I mean, one of the key components of jazz, was anybody at the Donald Harrison, Daniel Wolfe thing yesterday afternoon, which was an amazing event. And, you know, one of the things he said while we were having a drink afterwards was, you know, that it's all about jazz is more than any other music, and of course this has to be true, is about listening to other people as you're playing, because particularly in an improvisational situation it's going to come awry if you don't. In rock music, which I play, it's very nice when you turn around when the drummer asks you for a set of the lyrics. That's really a kind of a great moment, because you realize that they're trying to understand what you want, what the song is, and singing along in their head. But with jazz, it's almost, you know, it comes with the territory. It's what you've got to do. Just to throw it open to our musicians, do you do other things like this, or is Robert the first time you have played with somebody reading poetry?
Well, I've worked with singers, of course, over the years, and but it's funny, I was not really a huge fan of poetry, frankly.
It's bullshit.
Well, it's not that. It's that, you know, I was just disconnected to it. I actually come from a family of, my mom's an English teacher, my brother's a poet, his wife's a Pulitzer Prize-winning poet. So it's really, it's all around the house all the time. Maybe that's, but I didn't really get into it until working with Robert and hearing him perform the words, because really my experience with poetry prior to that was reading books of poems, and that's kind of like reading a screenplay of a movie versus seeing the movie. It doesn't, to me, it comes alive, it means something when we get to perform them. And I listened to, I checked out the poems, of course, and read them thoroughly and interpret them in my own way. But when it comes to actually playing, I'm not listening to the meaning of the words as much as I'm listening to how he says them. That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm feeling. And in that way, it's basically what I've been doing my whole professional life as a musician, just listening to phrasing, dynamics, the timbre of the words, how they sound, how they move around, and that's just like playing with the saxophone or any other instrument. That's
a fantastic answer. Do you think, Robert, I mean, that's very interesting. Do you is it all about, in the end, trying to, is this what you've done about a project about trying to take poetry off the page a little and into people's lives in a different way that is perhaps a little bit more accessible to them, or just mind expanding?
I don't think about accessibility. I always say, if you want to be real popular, you know, buy an electric guitar, and, you know, or something. I don't think about accessibility. It's just not an art of the page for me. I'm not that interested in graphics. I'd rather have a nicely designed book than not. But for me, it's like Ben said about reading a screenplay. For me, what's on the page is notation. It's like looking at a chart or musical score. And it's valuable notation. But what I try to do is something like Ben Jonson saying, that sentence, if you then would hear this story, first prepare you to be sorry that you never knew till now either whom to love or how, but be glad along with me when you'll know that she is she, whose beauty it was sung, she shall make the old man young, keep the old middle-aged stay, and let nothing hide decay till she be the reason why all the world for love may die. And it's like he's speaking, it's very natural word order, and he's doing it in the meter of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. And that's poetry for me. And it doesn't have to do with reading it off the page. Nothing could make me happier than have Ben say he's not thinking about what the words mean. I always find that question, what does it mean? Or worse yet, I'll get an email from some poor high school kid. I wonder if you could tell me what you were trying to say.
I know, and it's always so funny when you've tried so hard to try to say what you're trying to say. And you put it down in a certain amount of words, and then they ask you to explain those words in a Cliff Notes way.
So, no, I'm not interested in being popular or accessible. I'm just interested in the beauty of the sounds of sentences. Dizzy Gillespie, in a great Paris Review interview, he says that the heart of jazz, a lot of young players think it's all about chords, and they come to him to get lessons in harmony. He says, the main thing in jazz is phrasing. The main thing is the phrasing. And I read that when I was about 18 years old, and I knew immediately that's why I like jazz and poetry, is that the way a thing is articulated, that was it.
Because partly what you guys are listening to must be not far from the meaning of the words, but the exact rhythm that the words are said in, right?
Well, you know, the first thing I'd have to say is that it's just a great pleasure to work with someone who's tapping into the creative spirit, which is what I feel with Robert. In other words, whether it's words or music, there's a certain flow of spirit that I think is spontaneous, and yet at the same time there's a chart, or like we said, a screenplay. But not everybody can tap into that spirit so well, especially on a day like today when we, you know, just got together here on the stage. So to me, when you can blend words and music in a such a creative way, then it's, as Ben said, it's pretty much what we've been doing all of our life, but we don't often get to do it with a poet of this stature. So it was really a great pleasure, you know.
Do you work with music on? Do you listen to music? Can you listen to music when you write poetry, or are you coming up with some kind of a tune in your head, or is it just the rhythm?
I couldn't possibly listen to music while I'm writing. I'd be thinking about the music. You know, I'm not a real musician, but I'm enough of a musician where I always get the left brain and right brain mixed up. Which does it mean I am? I guess it's my left brain is going crazy. What's the instrumentation? What's the tune? What kind of chords are those? I'm thinking about the music, and maybe it's annoying me even. Maybe music I like or not. If it's music I love, all the more. I want to listen to it. So for me, you know, writing, I would rather write in an airport departure lounge, or while I'm watching kids, you're watching little kids who are playing. It's easier for me to compose then. But no, listening to music is like, it's as though I wrote when I was in an intense conversation with somebody.
Yeah.
Some people do, but for me, it's impossible.
No, I can't do it either. And you're right. I mean, one of the great things about poetry, particularly as opposed to novel writing or any longer form, is, you know, for writing novels, I have to be very stationary at my desk and in silence, really, for hours at a time. And I need even a day aside of working to get into it. Whereas poems or lyrics, you know, a napkin and a nice restaurant or a rubbish restaurant or a coffee place or the back of a bus is enough, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to describe your novel to Steve before. It's a novel about a composer. A lot of the characters are musicians. A central character is a music critic and, of course, a musician. And I would have been astonished, because it's so intimate with the music, I would have been astonished if you told me, yes, I listened to Gesualdo, or listened to anything at all while you were writing it. It's too intimate with music to use music as kind of a background,
yeah,
you know, or like a sip of a drink or something. It's not what it is.
I'm so touched that you would bother to describe my novel to anybody. I can't tell you. It's quite put me off the next question, actually.
Gotcha.
Do you think, obviously, jazz, as you were saying earlier, it's not necessarily the most, perhaps the music that is most listened to in this room. On what level do you hear other musics and think either, yes, I would like to, obviously jazz is your first love, but do you hear other musics and go, yes, I would like to experiment with that? Or do you think that is really well suited to this, even though I don't want to do it, that is really well suited to this kind of project?
It's a cliche to say, really, the categories aren't real, it's all just music. It's a rather trite thing to say. As with many cliches, like time flies, there's a very profound truth in it. So I hope that I am capable of hearing late Beethoven quartet. I've been listening to the Takash. They did the entire thing, and I listened to the early ones and the late ones where it's almost like some freakish modern thing. I hope I can learn from, I consciously think, why can't you do something like that? And classic Van Morrison, you know, the great years of Van Morrison, you listen to what he does
with his voice, but also what his voice is doing in relation to the other instruments, some of which he's playing. I would love to be able to do something like Astral Weeks.
It's so funny you say that, because when you did that bit, the moi noise in one of the poems today, there's so many bits in those great Van Morrison when his voice just ceases to be able to articulate, words cease to be able to articulate what he wants to emote, but that nonsense sounds can.
I've been listening lately to little Jimmy Scott. This is a very strange ballad singer. And again, there are times when, both musically and what he's doing with the words, you feel he's from some other planet. And again, I'll listen to him and think, do something like that. What would be an equivalent in your own métier, in your range of things that you could do that would be like that? So that's to name some things that are kind of, Beethoven, little Jimmy Scott, Van Morrison, and it's an attempt to somewhat flesh out the cliche that it's music, it's not, so easily categorizable.
What Dave was playing, funnily enough, at the beginning of the first song, which is what I want to take a little look at in a moment, in kind of the order of events, how I think it would be really interesting to know how we arrive at a finished presentation like that. And I know I know kind of the process, but interestingly, what Dave was playing at the beginning of the first song was very like what Bruce Springsteen was playing for one of the songs when he was reading with you before. And what I wanted to know, and I think
Bruce, by the way, said Samurai Song so beautifully. It's
yes.
on that video. He accompanies himself on the guitar, and he says the poem brought things out of the poem that is a poem of my own that I know quite well. I perform quite often.
Yeah.
I thought, guy has some, so we can add that to the list too.
Yeah, but it's what I wanted to, and we could start with Dave, but just explain to people, because people, you said we just got together, this afternoon to do this, but what does that really mean in terms of what I sat upstairs while you picked a set list. What does that really mean in the terms of the tempo or the melody? Do you just say fast, slow, or do you say key of this, or do you just, how much of any of it is worked out beforehand?
Well, we've been rehearsing this show for about 2 months now. No,
Night and
it's not
day.
true. We just met, and that's one of the beauties of the music that is.
Okay, let's get into that just. When did you meet?
Today.
Right. All of you met today for the first time.
Well, Steve and I have been playing together for many years, and Ben and I've known Ben, and we've played a few gigs together, and I've known him for a long time. And I'm, of course, a fan of Robert's. And so when David Daniel decided to have me and Steve involved with this, with Ben, and he kind of put it together, and the poems were sent to me and Steve, and we read the poems, and kind of in our mind, like I jotted down notes of things that, as I read them, that felt like to me, so I brought my a couple different guitars and with different tunings, and the first piece, I was really hearing that Delta blues with the slide guitar, and so and that's tuned to just to an E chord. So of course you mentioned Bruce Springsteen, but it all comes from down in the Delta, the blues, all the music we love, from jazz, rock and roll, it all started down there. And so it seemed like that seemed like an apropos place to start, at the root of the river.
And did these people know that you would be starting with that?
No.
And
I just started, I happened to be the first guitar I picked up when I plugged in today, and he started speaking his poetry right along. He just jumped right in, and it was like, okay, well, that's the first tune.
It was a great feeling, because these guys started playing that slow blues, and exactly as I used to do with the horn when I was with other musicians, I just sort of heard what he was doing. I wasn't going to ignore it, so I started saying the words of Antique, sort of in the key or in the tempo, the mode of it, and it started sounding good. It was exactly like musicians just messing around, saying, try that.
But there must be a kind of a feeling of whether a song, whether a poem or whatever, whether it is going to be an up-tempo thing or a slow thing, or, you know what I mean?
I feel that when I'm writing.
Right.
I mean, that one, The Hearts, where I was talking very fast, slashed by the little deaths of sleep and pleasure, sucking to sing, and the swallowing of the. I can't do it unless I start at the beginning.
Right.
Pulpy shore life battened on a jetty, slashed by the little deaths of sleep and pleasure, sucking the clean, sluiced by the waves, even in death itself, blah, 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 blah. It's long, so you play it fast. And, you know, if you see, it's like a piece of sheet music. You look at it and see the length of it almost tells you, well, you're going to do this.
Yeah. Sure. But when you played that very up-tempo bass line that began one of the songs, had any of these people heard that before?
No, but I gave them a little bit of a clue because, you know, since we're jazz musicians, well, musicians in general, we share a lot of knowledge about famous tunes, and that was based on a famous Duke Ellington tune called Sea Jam Blues. So, I mean, I think I just played kind of a little bit of a phrase of that tune, and Steve looked up and you know, I could tell he recognized it because it's a kind of a classic tune. Just that little bit of information, but you know.
But that's a lot of information to musicians,
isn't
it?
To use another analogy that's kind of cliche, but it's just so meaningful. Improvisation like this is just exactly like having a conversation. In the sense, I mean, so many of the rules of conversation.
A good conversation.
Hopefully a good conversation, but so many of those rules apply. For instance, you know, you might come up with a topic in advance, let's say, but how the conversation flows will normally be quite organic, so that right now I'm doing all the talking, but at times you will interject, and hopefully I'm going to stop and give you a second to respond, and then I'll respond to that. It always amazes me how quick our people's brains work in that regard, because we're used to having conversations, and we're taught at an early age, hopefully, how to be polite to one another and not interrupt and listen and then talk and know when those transitions are coming, and we anticipate each other's phrases and cadences so that if I ask a question, I'm setting you up to give me an answer, and all those sorts of things come into play when we improvise. So we can give each other just little, sometimes it sounds a little bit like magic, but really we are giving each other a lot of clues, feeding each other information that we're going to respond to. We didn't grow up on deserted islands. We grew up around here in America for the most part. We share a lot of common culture, a lot of knowledge of Western music, and probably Eastern music even. And there's a lot of conventions that come along with that we're all pretty much aware of.
So in that sense, improvisation in this, Robert is improvising his phrasing and his reading of it. I noticed that, you know, when you read the poem on its own, of course you read it one way, and when you read the poem with the band, of course you read it another way. So improvisation is both about what you bring in that you already know, and it might even be a melody or another song that you've planned or not even planned that just refers to you, listening to other people, and then the conversation commences. So by the end, the structure has become a much more free-flowing one, but based around the kind of...
That's right, like the Ben Jonson poem, it was really cool to hear you read it in advance. And my only thought as you were going through it was, I'm going to try to almost play your phrasing in unison and see if I can create a line that was following along. I was going to do my best to almost copy what he was doing, hopefully in a way that's not annoying.
It was great. We've never done it that way. We have done that poem together before. Never that way. I was thrilled by it. I loved it.
It must be a very ecstatic, I mean, it must be a quietly ecstatic experience for you.
It was tremendous. And as an example of some kind of communication or instinct, other times you've done the poem, I repeat the second sentence. Ben will take us over that sentence that I love that I did just now. And I could tell, because of the way he was doing it, that the way we were going to do it was going to end once through the poem. And we didn't discuss that. It just, you felt it.
When we did the Move On Up showcase for Wamfest the other night, where a lot of the students read monologues and did readings, and there was poetry, and it was a great night in the theatre. And I have this particular show called The Cabinet of Wonders, and every time we do the show, we finish with this song called Religious Experience, which is a song by an English songwriter not particularly well known called Kevin Ayres. And the entire lyric to the song is singing a song in the morning, singing it again at night. I don't even know what I'm singing about, but it makes me feel I feel all right. Yeah. It makes me feel I feel all right. And the great thing about that song is you can give that song to anybody about half an hour before the show. And by the end of the show, or indeed by the third verse of that song, they themselves can sing, they themselves can be at the lead vocal, leading the band, or doing a solo, or whatever. It's just it's a very ecstatic, and it's called Religious Experience. Yeah. And it's dead right, it's what it sounds like. Is there anything in that way, one of your poems, or anything that, because we have time for one more, and I'm wondering if there's anything that's popped out of the conversation here that's something that, rather than finish with words, we can finish with words and music, which is indeed the name of the festival.
Well, I'm open to suggestions. We could do shirt. Somebody yelled out to do shirt. I was going to suggest. You'll have to give me a copy of shirt. I'm not sure I have it by heart. I was going to suggest the reincarnation poem, Street Music.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
I apologize to the person who said shirt. I thank you for naming a poem I wrote. And,
one of his great poems. Yeah. One of his greatest poems. Available in Robert Pinsky's Greatest Hits, which is for sale in the foyer.
It is in the selected.
Nice. Yeah. I like Greatest Hits.
I guess we'll try Street Music.
We're going to take just a little moment to reconfigure the stage. And so for the finale of... We've had 2 Wamfests this year. Amazing. Thank you so much, particularly, of course, a round of applause for David Daniel. And I'm just going to cover for a second while we get the stage into place. But this has been a fantastic, the emphasis has been very much on jazz in this Wamfest. And after Donald Harrison and Daniel Wolfe and Jonathan Demme yesterday, it seems like it couldn't get any better. And then it does.
Let's do horn. I can't find street music. Let's do horn.
Let's hear it one more time, please. By the way, they told me their name was the Beatles. Robert Pinsky and the Beatles. A round of applause.
So we talked about doing this one. Steve and I talked about the possibility of doing this one where if I can call myself playing, we'll be playing at the same time. It won't be call and response. And it's a poem that retells an anecdote. It's appropriate to end with. I couldn't find the other one. Again, I'm not sure I have it by heart. You may have noticed I mostly have these memorized, but I cheat quite a lot. This is a poem we haven't done anything except we didn't try it or practice it, but we thought that maybe it would work playing at the same time. It's based on a story I love about Charlie Parker, who, among other things, seemed to be able to hear something good in the playing of any hack musician, some individual thing, like your fingerprint or your retina, your smell, it's all different. So the poem is called Horn. This is the golden trophy. This is the true addiction. The steel springs, the pearl facings, fibers and leathers, all of it mounted on a body tarnished from neck to bell. The master, a legend, a quote, righteous addict. He pauses while he's walking past a bar with his friend.
He pauses to listen. He says, listen. Listen what that cat in there is doing. Listen. Some figure. Some hook. Breathy honk. A sharp nine or some weird rhythm that this one hack journeyman hornman had going. Listen, listen, says the Dante of Bop. Listen to what he's working. Listen, breath tempered in its chamber by hide pads. Listen to the breath as desires and demands swarm through the deft acts in the fixed attention of that one practitioner. Oh, listen. Listen. Professional calluses, habits from his righteous teachers, his dentist, his optician. Listen, a crazed matriarch, the hexed architect of his making, the horn. Polished and punished by use. Polished and punished by use. The horn. Flawed. Severe. It nestles in plush. It nestles in its plush hard case, cradled and curved to cradle that engraved hook shape made out of Normandy brass. Keys from seashells. Keys from seashells in the Mekong. The reed from Belize. Listen. Labor. Flip all the altered scales in the woodshed. Listen. Persist. You practiced addict to the horn. You devotee. Listen, you addict, devotee, slave of Dante, like Dante himself a slave. Dante, whose name they say is short for Durante, meaning persistent. Listen, Durante, Dante. Listen, you bondsman of the tool. Listen, you honker. Listen, you toker. You toiler. Listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much to Robert Pinsky and his band today, Poem Jazz.